I wanted to introduce Allison Levy. Allison's director of Brown University Digital Publications, a program of high distinction based in the University Library at Brown. I've gotten to know Allison over the past several years and really admire what she and her team is doing. She can tell us a bit more about that, but just if you are not familiar with their work at Brown Digital Publications, it's really amazing. She's won several awards, she and her team. You could read her full bio in the conference schedule as well as other bios. But Allison, I'm going to turn it over to you and you can get us started.
Thanks very much, John. Thanks for the nice introduction. Thanks to everyone who helped organize this event. We're looking forward to a great conversation. I am Allison Levy, Director of Brown University Digital Publications, and I am filling in for Clare Jones, who is Assistant Editor of Brown University Digital Publications. And I am going to be joined in this first segment by Tanya Rogers, Sara Cohen, and we have pre-recorded remarks from Diona Layden. So thank you for your patience as we've had to pivot just a little bit with the makeup of the panel today. So I am going to get us started. And I'm going to be speaking about an IMLS-funded program, grant program entitled Advancing HBCU Scholarship, Diversifying Digital Publishing. So with generous support from the IMLS Laura Bush 21st Century Librarian Program, and in partnership with the HBCU Library Alliance and the University of Michigan Press, Brown University Digital Publications has established Advancing HBCU Scholarship, Diversifying Digital Publishing, a cross-organizational training program for HBCU library professionals seeking to gain or expand expertise in developing born digital scholarship in the humanities. This first-of-its-kind partnership between a predominantly white R1 university library, a consortium of HBCU libraries, and a leading university press will nucleate networks of HBCU content generators and facilitators and publishers to produce outstanding scholarship that without developmental investment and enhanced visibility might not have had the same kind of impact on the academy. The collaboration will promote a broader array of scholars and research programs to help shape scholarly discourse going forward. This expansive, collaborative approach to born digital publishing will develop capacity at HBCU libraries while providing extended author support over the full life cycle of the projects. In addition, students involved in the development of digital publications will gain expertise and experience and training relevant for a wide range of careers where knowledge and skills with digital media are central. In sum, this multi-pronged intervention addresses equity issues endemic to academic publishing by establishing models for enhanced support for HBCU staff, faculty, and students to enrich and expand scholarly discourse through their contributions. The University of Michigan Press is collaborating with Brown University Library to mentor the cohort. With its demonstrated commitment to issues of equity, diversity, and social justice, the press publishes in a wide range of humanities and social science disciplines and boasts a global distribution program. It has demonstrated capabilities for supporting born digital multimedia works using the publishing platform Fulcrum, which, supported by a generous grant from the Mellon Foundation, presents the full richness of authors' research in a durable, discoverable, accessible, and flexible form. We are now a little more than a year into this 3-year training program. Via a public-facing website, which we expect to launch next month, Program resources will be readily accessible and adaptable by other institutions and communities, both nationally and internationally. The benefits of the project will thus be sustained well beyond the grant period and the current cohort, which includes librarian author pairs from Fisk University, Kentucky State University, and Prairie View A&M University. You'll now hear from Diona Layden, who was until very recently Special Collections Librarian at Fisk University. Diona has moved to another institution and is no longer participating in the program, but she very generously pre-recorded remarks on her experience over the last year.
Hello, I am Diona Layden, and I served as Special Collections Librarian at Fisk University from August 2022 to September 2024. I joined the team in spring 2024. The collaboration with Brown University and the University of Michigan Press has been invaluable. The partnership allows librarians at Fisk University, a small historically Black university, also known as an HBCU, to access resources and professional development that otherwise might not have been available. For example, in May of this year, the librarian cohort, along with Clare Jones and Sara Cohen, attended the Library Publishing Forum. I had limited knowledge of library publishing, but was very interested in learning more after speaking with a scholarly communications librarian during my practicum in library school. The conference sessions were very enlightening. I learned about the different platforms on which digital products are housed, was inspired by the different projects and collaborations of the various presenters, and was motivated to share with my library's administration the additional ways in which Fisk could use technology to enhance services to students, faculty, and staff. The partnership also provides librarians with training in library publishing. I gained a greater understanding of the things to consider when creating a digital-born monograph. Which platform is best suited for my faculty members' digital product? What are the guidelines for adding digital assets to the platform? And to ensure accessibility for all viewers. As the partnership continues, it will be a model for other institutions that want to collaborate to make publishing more accessible to a wider group of authors. Thank you.
Thank you to Diona for those remarks. I'm glad that she took the time, very grateful she took the time to record that and to be able to share it with all of you. And now I'm going to hand things over to LaTanya Reese Rogers from Fisk, who is Associate Professor of Literature and Drama. And LaTanya is going to speak about the author's experience in this program. LaTanya.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Allison, and thank you, John and Pooja, for putting together this outstanding forum. I've joined many sessions, and this is really informative. I do have some slides that I could load if they can't be loaded through the platform. But while those are loading, I will just start talking. This project began with an NEH grant, as Allison mentioned, that supported, 10, 12 of us, 14 of us to come to Brown University and begin learning about born digital publications. For many of us, this was uncharted territory. We learned about platforms, we learned about the resources available, we met the people involved in digital publishing, both at Brown University and at presses across the nation. And this was a really informative and valuable process because now, as a singular scholar, I feel well informed about digital publishing, and particularly about born digital publishing. And this means that I then have the skills to disseminate across my campus. I'm at Fisk University, an HBCU in Nashville, Tennessee, and there are other scholars on my campus who have been ignited now because of my involvement with born digital publishing. And so that was the NEH Institute portion of this experience. As Allison mentioned, we've now begun the IMLS grant portion of this, which is set to really diversify digital publishing. This truly is a cross-organizational training and support program, not just for the librarians, but also for the authors. I am in the middle of a manuscript creation that will then move on to Sara Cohen at University of Michigan Press, and fingers crossed that her press will accept this manuscript. I'm really excited about it. And this program has had really a shaping input and a shaping presence in my ability to, as an author, create in a born digital environment. We have received full author support. Our students will receive training. And this really solves some of the equity issues, as Allison mentioned, that truly are endemic in academic publishing. So the fact that Fulcrum and University of Michigan Press have the ability to distribute globally and make this text available to scholars, students, theater goers across the world is awesome. The discoverable element alone in born digital publishing makes this very, very valuable. So my project is based in drama, based in theater. I am a scholar of particularly Black women playwrights, those known and lesser known. And my project examines plays by Susan Laurie Parks, who happens to be the first Black woman to have won the Pulitzer Prize for drama. So this is a theoretical investigation in this work. It will be born digital. We're hoping to launch this on Fulcrum. It is not an iterative project, and it will be about 40,000 words. So I'm really interested in this project and really excited about opening the world really to Black women playwrights who are sometimes lesser known in both the fields of literature and scholarship. Thank you. I have moved past these slides, but if you'd like to just click them along, I can talk just for a second on each one. This was the NEH experience that began this opportunity. This was summer 2002, Allison. And these were the scholars in the program and many of the professionals from Brown University digital publications. And some of the publishers were in the room as well. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, this began with that experience and moved on for me to several conference presentations, several panels related to this work, including this one. Next slide. Since learning these new skills, I have published in a Born Digital journal, an article on Susan Laurie Parks. It sort of kickstarts this work, so that's really exciting. Next slide. And these are some of the elements of this Born Digital manuscript that I am creating for University of Michigan Press in mind. So this is this work features 4 plays by Susan Laurie Parks. And this tentative title is Mimicry, Minstrelsy, and Masking across 4 of her plays. So this is mostly the part that I mentioned, that this is single authored, it's fully digital, it's not iterative. The audience is specialists, non-specialists, and students. That is really important to me, and students. The intended publisher, University of Michigan Press. I really like clear signposts. This is fully open access, mid-touch, Fulcrum, about 40,000 words, and hopefully 8 videos and 10 sound files. And so these are some of the challenges, concerns to creating a digital work. 1, licensing images, access to video clips, especially since these will be plays. So there are some concerns around unions and actor rights, subvention, long-term preservation of this content. So I'm really excited about Fulcrum. And then just balancing this project in a realistic world with teaching, administrative, and family care loads. And we're just about to the end. So the monograph, as I mentioned, looks into 4 plays. And these are about right now about 15 pages each. So we'll get those to about 20 pages, 25, and then translate that into word count. And there's a wish list here. I'm hoping that this project will be hybrid so that it will be accessible digitally, but also in a print version so that our students can remember the art of opening the book. Thank you very much for your time and interest, and we look forward to questions after the session. I suppose now I'm passing this to Sara Cohen.
That was really beautiful, Tanya. And I actually don't have any prepared remarks because I was told that I should be here for the Q&A in case there were questions for me. So I'll just say I'm really happy to be here. I'm grateful to Allison for stepping in for Claire, grateful to Diona for sending that video. I miss her, and really looking forward to questions when we get there.
Thank you, Sara. Thank you, LaTanya.
Ana Maria Jimenez-Moreno is acquisitions editor at the Ohio State University Press, where she oversees the literary and cultural studies list, ranging from classics to contemporary Black performance. She's served as a committee member and then chair of the AU Press's Library Relations Committee. And this panel is on adventures in digital publishing, opportunities, challenges, and looking ahead. So, Maria, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you so much, John, for that introduction. What I am going to do is, so we have a structure of as John mentioned, of looking at how this group was founded, what we have learned, and possible next steps. And so in that light, it's going to be Allison, myself, and then May. I'm going to share a link to the website and Adventures in Digital Publishing, and then I'll let Allison take it away. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks again, John. So I'm going to get this one going as well and then pass the baton to my other colleagues. So launched in 2020 to celebrate, document, and encourage new innovations in the publication of digital humanistic scholarship, Adventures in Digital Publishing has now completed 5 episodes, each showcasing and exploring enhanced and interactive digital books that have been published by university presses. The series has brought to light the many kinds of collaborations forged and tested by publishing-born digital projects, as well as the wide range of forms that engaged and responsible scholarship can take, such as multimodal monographs or podcasts, for example. This panel will provide a broad overview of the genesis of the series, what we've learned from the case studies, and what trends we see ahead, both for this genre of scholarly work and the publishing ecosystem. So now for the genesis. Adventures in Digital Publishing grew out of a summit co-hosted by Brown University and Emory University on multimodal digital monographs. Though the summit took place virtually in spring 2021 due to the pandemic interruptions, planning for the event dates to 2019 and thus predates the start of the webinar series, though these two endeavors are very closely intertwined. Let me go back still further. Efforts to reimagine the monograph for the 21st century started in 2014 with the launch of the Mellon Foundation's Digital Monograph Initiative. Inclusive of a small handful of planning grants that led up to the official 2014 launch, the foundation awarded $32.78 million in grants to 44 organizations, some receiving multiple grants between 2011 and 2020. While a large part of Mellon's investment went to building out the digital infrastructure available to university presses, the foundation also sought to support the community of scholars seeking to legitimate the expanded possibilities that digital publication offered for developing and presenting their research. To this end, a smaller number of grants was awarded to institutions experimenting with university-based models of support for faculty, ranging from developmental editing and design support to assistance in placing the work with suitable publishers. In February 2018, the Mellon Foundation hosted an all projects meeting for many of the institutional support grantees. Representatives of these projects gathered in New York to share progress and challenges with one another during what were still germinal days. During this period, the foundation also convened project teams from the University Press cohort to promote collaboration between platform and tool developers. 3 years later, with the encouragement of Mellon's public knowledge program, 2 of the grantees, Brown and Emory, sought to foster a more comprehensive conversation, including, for the first time, the author's perspective. With a focus on scholarly content, the summit convened scholars, digital content developers, and representatives from university presses. Case studies of 8 recently published or in development works provided the basis for in-depth, evidence-based discussions about the most pressing concerns and challenges facing stakeholders in digital scholarly publishing. And again, this was around 2020. Participants considered questions of cross-institutional collaboration, community engagement, professional development, open access, peer review, metadata and discoverability, preservation, and sustainability. Although the summit focused on a selection of projects supported by the Mellon Foundation's Digital Monographs Initiative, the presentations and generative discussions that followed raised important concerns and opportunities that extend well beyond the initial aims of the featured projects. Chief among them, to promote greater inclusion and equitable access of diverse voices as the development, validation, and dissemination of multimodal digital monographs continues to unfold. A year following the summit, Sara McKee and I, Sara was then at Emory, she's now at ACLS, we published a white paper entitled Multimodal Digital Monographs, Content, Collaboration, Community, which served as a starting point to acknowledge the work that was already underway, to learn what we could from it, and to seek viable, sustainable means of furthering our shared mission to increase the visibility and reach of humanities scholarship to audiences both within and beyond the academy. We conceived of Adventures in Digital Publishing as a means not only to keep the conversation going, but above all, to expand it. We were committed to continuing to feature entire project teams, including the authors, but we also sought to showcase new scholarly forms that were being created beyond the Mellon family of grantees. In addition to thinking more broadly about the case studies, we wanted to reach those presses that had not yet published born digital work. Aware of the growing interest from authors, we wanted to help grow interest on the publisher side. So the AU Press's membership was the obvious audience for our objectives. We remain deeply grateful to the Digital Publishing Committee, the Library Relations Committee, and the Open Access Committee of AU Presses for their encouragement and support to launch and grow the series. And at this point now, I am going to hand things over to Anna to talk about the series in its present form.
Great, thank you. And can everybody hear me? Guessing? Great. So I just wanted to echo another thanks to the organizers and certainly to my co-panelists, as well as the group who is here, who are, I'm sure, joining us in spirit if they're not here today. So I would like to focus on the lessons learned from the 5 episodes currently up on the Adventures in Digital Publishing, Collaborations and Conversations website. And again, I dropped it in the chat. Especially as it pertains to the point of view of the publisher and the author, and my own role as an acquisitions editor for monographs in the humanities and social sciences informs my contributions to this group and also what I have learned from the episodes. The 5 episodes are just a small amount of the total output from numerous university presses, platforms, and collaborations. But some that were covered in the episodes include the University of Virginia Press, the University of Michigan Press, Stanford, Wilfrid Laurier Press, Rotunda, Fulcrum, and Scalar, the last being platforms. My approach will be to focus on a process-based overview from initial conversation to how it lives in the world and the respect and care for which these projects and thinkers are treated. So how to start? As early as possible is the refrain in the episodes. This is not something that should or can be retrofitted to be a digital/born project, but something that in its inception needs to be thought through. There are pipelines within a university press that these projects can be mapped onto quite efficiently, but there are also creative ways in which these projects need to be treated. Speaking about the project early in the process, even at a fuzzy conceptual phase, can give the author greater options about what platforms to use and that might determine how, from a technological standpoint, it is supported. So for example, one press wanted to limit, this was just discussed before, limit the external objects, for example, videos from YouTube, because their concern was if that video and link would continue to exist in the future, preservation certainly being a concern. Some anxieties like this are very familiar to those in publishing and libraries. In other words, permissions don't suddenly go away with the digital born project. Discussions about the integration between the content and the functionality of these digital spaces are somewhat new. In thinking about the scholarly dimensions of the project, I could generalize and say that for authors, there might have been 2 camps. Those that thought this is definitely scholarship and it needs to look like this. It needs to be digitally born. It needs to have these features, interactions. It needs to be this rap song, this podcast, what have you. And there were some who wondered if what they were doing was scholarship. And in some cases, it was the acquisitions editor's job to convince them it was indeed valuable research for those within and outside of the academy. It is important for both author and editor to have an open-minded idea of what scholarship is and who it impacts. In terms of vetting projects for an acquisitions editor, sometimes there are factors other than fit, that nebulous idea of fit, such as technology, the use of a platform or imprint, and the cultivation of external partnerships that was at play in their decision-making, or conversely, what made the author approach a certain press in the first place. For peer review, in the shape of the questionnaire that acquisitions editors typically share with readers, or the flow of the process might look different. In most episodes, there were multiple references of drawing best practices from different sectors within the publishing community, and sometimes outside of it, those who really solved problems that we were facing years ago. Acquisitions editors debated about where to send it to peer review in order to address both the content and the functionality of the digital born project. For the questionnaire, in some cases, it would have been best to have the scholarly questions first and technical questions second to direct reader attention. Sometimes the results of peer review surprise the editor in that the reader still focused more on the content than on the functionality. But most importantly, it is not about, quote, quality control, but those who understood and support the work. End quote. In some cases, there has been, quote, much revision and polishing and workshopping and collaboration and peer reviewing before it even landed on my desk, end quote. Again, from the point of view of the editor and how much pre-work really had to get done. At the same time, acquisitions editors had to be mindful of when in the process revisions and feedback could be incorporated and adjust the process accordingly. In terms of further internal support, the editorial board was still a key player. The editorial board is typically made of a faculty within the university press who approve of the project. Editors still had to define the project and get the board to endorse it. In one case, the board pushed back because they wanted to see more scholarly engagement from the readers. Again, they weren't concerned about what the project was doing or what its value was. But again, this is familiar territory for the publisher, having to be a cheerleader for a particular project. And one facet of the episodes discussed throughout is promotion, and tenure, and how and if a digital-born project counts. Some, as stated above, rigorously argued, some authors, that it should count because of the level of engagement, because it is scholarship, it is scholarly. Others were or might be happy for it not to count because protections over their speech might go away if this was reviewed by an institution. Funding came up repeatedly in the episodes as well. It is typically not coming from the press itself, although staff time is valuable and limited. The funding is typically coming from an organization. Press staff have to know for how long the project is funded for, which may determine how this project is built up. Usage statistics, the discussion of metrics and impact run the gamut. Some metrics are a bit hazy because of the unevenness within the reporting structure. In other cases, it is very clear from the interface, for example, how many times it has been downloaded. In many cases, the author's and the editor's purpose was to reach a scholarly audience, yes, but also practitioners, artists, students, and intellectuals, broadly conceived. And I know I've touched on this a little bit everywhere, but pipelines. There might be different professionals involved in the publication process, from developers, which again, UPs, university presses might be less familiar with, to contributors from outside the academy, which we're more familiar with, to editorial design and production departments getting involved in what might otherwise be an early part of a process. There might be adjustments in terms from transmittal, again, which is in-house use, might be called migration. But the connections with unexpected groups helps to grow the capabilities of the press and the knowledge of the staff. Accessibility and durability is of huge importance that we could spend eons on discussing, that can only really be glanced at here. Having robust ONIX, MARC, and other metadata records for the scholarly ecosystem is vital, and sometimes it is a best practices situation, it's finding best practices, or sort of adapting a hodgepodge of things to make sure it is visible to the world. So once these projects are published, they are still marketed, and in some cases even more robustly. A list of materials might include, but are certainly not limited to, series flyers, web pages, obviously shown at conferences, catalogs with beautiful 2-page spread. It is treated no differently, basically, than a printed book, but in a positive sense. What is perhaps most exciting are the doors being opened, the new tools being developed for scholarship and scholars, again, broadly defined. And I'll pass it on to May now.
Thanks so much, Anna. Thanks everyone for being here. So we've talked about how this series got started and also about some of the common threads that we've seen emerge through the different episodes. So in the last section of this presentation, I'm going to reflect on the changes that we've observed since starting the series a few years ago and how that's shaping the directions in which we're taking it forward. So one of the major shifts that we've observed across the landscape of scholarly publishing has been the increasing visibility of innovative digital publications. So this has happened both as part of and also parallel to the much larger uptake of open access book publication, which necessarily requires digital editions and so has helped to normalize scholarly books being available on the web, which is not to suggest that there still isn't resistance or skepticism or anxiety from a lot of corners. So for those of us who work directly with authors, this means that they very often now have examples of other projects in mind when they think about the possibilities for their own books. The downside of this is that there is still a real blurriness between digital humanities projects and digital books, which can mean that something that looks really cutting edge and engaging to users doesn't necessarily have the lifespan that an author would expect from a long-form research publication. And so there does need to be a lot of expectation management. There's also still a lot of obscurity around how different projects were funded, and so authors often don't have a sense of what is or isn't possible for their own publisher or their own institution. So while visibility and recognition have increased, confusion in some ways has also increased. So on the publisher side, while there is more familiarity with digital books, that doesn't mean that the production process has become more transparent. And so there's still a lot of hesitation among presses to make changes to their well-oiled workflows for the sake of a less established book format, especially for smaller presses, which have limited people hours to allot to each project. So this is especially the case when we move from verbatim open access editions in PDF or EPUB or even HTML to any digital project, which either varies from its print counterpart or doesn't have a print counterpart at all. And we've talked about the sort of born digital interactive books. So even if a digital edition is actually only minorly different from a print edition, for example, it has additional audiovisual resources or it has dynamic rather than static maps, those require necessary adjustments to the workflow, and that makes many presses understandably hesitant to experiment with even going a little bit in this direction. So as a result, we've decided that our web series should showcase not only the most technically innovative projects, but also those which use out-of-the-box technical solutions to expand the function and types of content possible in a scholarly book. And this is something that we've been thinking about as we've done these episodes, because even with the simplest tech stack, there are new workflows required around permissions, peer review and when to do it, metadata, and we believe it will be helpful to publishers to see the behind-the-scenes work for these sorts of lower-hanging digital publication options. Indeed, we've seen that even among projects which use the same platform or deploy the same technical stack, there are wide variations in the collaborations which underpin them. So for example, some authors work directly with developers, using their research funding or grants that they've received, whereas in other cases, presses work directly with third-party vendors, and in yet other cases, presses are working in partnership with digital scholarship staff at universities. So a whole range of things, even behind projects which on the published side look maybe similar. So we therefore want to keep showcasing the nitty-gritty behind-the-scenes collaboration and really being transparent about what they relied on in terms of funding, staffing, programmatic support, how communication worked, what the timelines were, who was contributing what, and where there were pain points. And sometimes this is difficult to elicit because it's really like the honest and unvarnished side of putting these projects together. So we want to both celebrate them, but also make sure that we're exposing how they came to be in the most pragmatic sense. So while it's clear to us that university press staff remain a really important audience for our web series, not least because, in many fields, they're the gold standard in scholarly book publishing, and they handle many of the book projects which support the tenure and promotion of faculty authors, the diversity of collaborations behind the projects we've already showcased, and also for others that are on our list to showcase in future episodes, that's really drawn attention to the relevance of these conversations to other folks in this broader scholarly publishing landscape. So we're thinking of staff at digital scholarship centers, scholarly communication staff in libraries and research institutes, the authors themselves, students of publishing, like some of you here today, and even the community of software developers who partner regularly with researchers on digital projects. So as we move forward, we're aiming to expand how we promote our episodes, both in terms of the live conversation, which we invite folks to attend remotely, and also how we share our recordings. So our episodes are around 75 minutes long and aim to cover, as has been mentioned, the whole publication process from research idea through acquisition, review, production, and promotion. And we're working on making shorter and more easily digestible clips from our recordings for audiences who are maybe interested in particular segments of the publishing process. We're also discussing future episodes that would be issue-based rather than focusing on a single publication. So for example, an episode on funding models or on peer review for digital projects. And it would be great to hear if you in the audience have suggestions of episode topics that you'd find helpful. So just to close, from our vantage point as producers of the Adventures in Digital Publishing web series, the past few years have led us to believe that the future of digital publishing is bright, but we recognize that it's still incredibly even and the source of many misapprehensions. So we believe that programs like ours, which try to facilitate knowledge sharing and foster community, remain an important tool to empower everyone involved in the publishing process. Thank you.
So we're going to go to our next session. We've had the opportunity to hear so far from several alumni and students of our publishing program at GW. And Rachel Kahn is a recent graduate. She graduated this year from the program, and she has a goal of working in children's literature and libraries. She and her partner, Leo, who we will also hear from, have co-founded Words for Library project, and she and Leo are going to talk about it.
Hi, I'm Rachel Kahn, recent graduate of GW Masters in Publishing program and a fellow lover of libraries. Thank you to John, Pooja, and Taylor for organizing the second virtual day for us folks who aren't local to the DMV. We appreciate it.
And as John just mentioned, I'm Leo Postavoid. I have a background in media as a professional working with large brands, mostly in the journalism space around publishing, and in the ecosystem. I feel like it's very important here. We usually see these things sorry, my notes are off. I studied at San Jose State's journalism and anthropology program. I'm delighted to be Rachel's co-founder of Words for Libraries. And we're here to share some interesting stories by the end of our presentation, and we hope that you'll feel as strongly as we do by the end of it all.
So first off, let me tell you, libraries are hot again. They're all the rage on TikTok and Gen Z loves them. They're all over TV, episodes from the current seasons of Futurama and Marvel's Agatha All Along, dozens of episodes of The Simpsons over the years, and even an entire story arc on Abbott Elementary last season that highlighted the importance of libraries and celebrating a love of reading. Since the 90s, investment in and attendance at public libraries has generally been up, aside from some slowness from 2012 to 2021, and we're seeing a recent resurgence, especially with newer generations Z and A. 54% of Americans ages 13 to 40 visited a physical library within the past year. Book Talk now contributes to 40 million sold copies each year and is considered the most important platform for discovering new writers. But I think it's more than that. From 2019 to 2022, backlist titles that trended on Book Talk saw a sales increase of over 1,000%. These newer generations love rediscovering what they consider to be old media, and the library represents that. And the opportunity cuts both ways. Those who aren't using it match the expected demographic data. 19% of Americans say they have never visited a public library or a bookmobile. Of those who have never been, they are likely male, ages 65 and older, BIPOC, high school graduates or less, and living in households earning less than $30,000. So this all comes in tension with our culture becoming more multimedia oriented. American adults spend their time on TV, phones, tablet, etc., not in the digital or physical pages of what could become their favorite novel.
And we can see society shifting away from reading as a practice. I think libraries serve as one of the best examples of a good third place, one that isn't home or work or school, just exist and be. And now about half of parents with children under 18 visit the library yearly, and this continues to trend downward. It used to be larger. We've seen less and less every single year. About 1 in 4 American adults report that they have not read a book in the last year. And again, just as Rachel had echoed and other presentations today have as well, this is especially among adults of color, those with no college education, and earning less than $30,000 a year in household income. And while there's a lot of data here that is stressful and it's a lot to read, one of the things I'd like to quickly mention and focus on is on news readership. I can tell you I've witnessed in my career how across all media channels news readership has down massively. And though we have seen some publications grow, the reality is that the sister industry of words, journalism, is also competing basically the same way from other media types.
We just want people to read.
And effectively what we've seen in our research is that people keep talking about this idea of psychological stress in spaces, whereas we've all worked hard to make books and reading basically boundlessly comfortable. We think that this conversation that we're having today is just as impactful and as the never-ending effort to solve censorship and combat book bans. And we therefore think that the industry narrative should shift away from the language of focusing on banned books, moving toward ALA's new tagline of Books for All. It celebrates positive changes in reading and brings inclusive messages that allow for a bigger conversation together on this issue. As I just shared, there's a lot of work to be done, and libraries can be better if we allow them to be. So let's take a second and try it out. I'm facing this ethical imperative. We want you to feel the reading-focused narrative shift back to the inspiration message, that public libraries are key to cultivating lifelong readers, that you, the new champion, the publishers, likely in trade publishing, but not exclusively, are already doing. You're well-equipped to invest in libraries. You're focused on cultures and reading. In fact, your marketing teams, their entire focus is on creating lifelong demand. And you already consider the social audiences. And given that we're both, Rachel and I, millennials, we're observed, this fascinating habit among Gen Z and Gen A to go back and redefine the old media that was new just 10 years ago. We think that it's wonderful to watch these people be expressing their joy in sharing these things and sharing their discovery.
We think that publishers can continue to build on the already existing efforts from what the American Library Association has begun as they shift their focus from fighting banned books to promoting Books for All. We know there is lots of need and clear rationale to help, so we want to start the conversation on how to use existing budgets from marketing dollars or your corporate social responsibility efforts. But we recognize it's difficult to know where to start. It's overwhelmingly complicated. This is what I started exploring in my ethics class at GW last year. I wanted to try to understand how my local libraries of Los Angeles and Orange counties serve their diverse and mostly urban and suburban populations. I wanted to narrow down the 289 branches across the 30 different library systems in our region and focus on what we could visit. I chose 14 branches to conduct the initial study on, but we have since looked at dozens of branches across California and a few across the country too in person. I started over at libraries.org to get a listing of all of California's libraries and blended this with census.org data. Since public libraries are allocated funding by zip code, I could see disparities in the library access based on typical socioeconomic factors. As an example, wealthier, whiter areas have more branches and lower income areas with residents of color have far fewer.
And let me tell you, this sounds like a lot, but without stepping into a single library for this project, it was obvious this is extremely complicated. Libraries are funded, structured, and shaped in complex bureaucratic arrangements. As an example, both Rachel and I grew up in Southern California, and my hometown of Whittier had 6 different library systems within a 15-minute drive. And Rachel's neighborhood only had one system, but 3 branches within that system. And many parts of Southern California only have one system and one branch within a 15-minute drive. Plus, the complex system of interlibrary loans, and as well as access to titles, especially in the narrative of book bans, means that these overlapping systems are confusing at best. So, for example, there is an Orange Public Library, Orange County Public Library, Los Angeles Public Library, and Los Angeles County Public Library. And basically, every single system admits that its patrons get these things confused, and they often return books to the wrong location in the wrong system. One other big point we also came up that we thought was important to mention, one of the old former librarians in Long Beach actually moved up to a rural county and talked about this, and we thought it was such an interesting topic. The rural versus urban divide is also real. Libraries in less dense areas of our counties, as well as further out into the major metros, out into Central California, serve a greater importance as community hubs, and that characteristic is important to also consider.
So we picked 14 library branches of the original 289 to visit and tried to answer these questions. Are these libraries easy to access and welcoming? How do we make patrons never want to leave and always want to come back? The best news is that most libraries were great. We evolved our study to focus on actionable results and found it to be wonderfully interesting.
And yeah, some of these suggestions to improve libraries might feel obvious, and they might be, but they came up time and time again. And as you'll see in a second, Rachel will call out some of the outliers we think are the most interesting. And the worst of the bunch, which is really not many of them, there's not much here is really bad, are mostly impacted by regional politics. For example, an easy target is one of the largest libraries in the United States, Central in downtown LA. While there were millions of dollars pumped into its major renovation during the 1980s that focused on the future, the many issues surrounding LA's unhoused population means most of the soft seating that would be in the library that makes it really comfortable to read is now unavailable to the general public. So imagine being among 91 miles of bookshelves across 13 floors in what looks like a literal temple in the center of one of the largest cities across the entire world, and just 4 soft chairs available to public patrons. It's hard to want to stay after a visit at the gift shop, which it has, even though it's a great place to be.
And as you can tell, this is obviously not easy to solve, but we need to identify pathways to addressing at least some of the issues. Our focus was on quantitative, implementable things that we could observe. For a few reasons, we think this scoring method gives us a fair framework to evaluate branches to each other and suggest area of investments for funders, which we hope our publishers beyond government and other underwriters.
So as we said here, we've broken this up into 2 categories, the first being facilities and infrastructure, which had 5 focuses, and Rachel will share some highlights for those.
So I want to highlight some of the interesting stories that we found. Having books at height for early readers seemed like an easy win, but the branch that's over in the richest neighborhood in our city missed the mark. Soft seating was another that we expected to find at every location, but as Leo mentioned earlier, it was really lacking for both kids and adults in some of the libraries we visited, but the ones that had it fully knocked it out of the park. A lot of the libraries we saw had a lot of incredible resources and made it really easy for patrons to get what they need. But when we visited one of the most famous libraries on TikTok, it had an incredible aquarium in the most beautiful children's section, but the Wi-Fi was only available to those with a library card. And unlike most library branches, this is only free to Cerritos residents and a $150 fee per year if you're not a special type of local. Also of note, one library system, Orange County, had free interlibrary loans, contributing to the idea of boundless reading for all.
The second category we focused on was around content and curation, which also had 5 more focuses that broke down what we thought might be implementable in these changes.
Looking at the content offerings, they all had large print books right at the front and plenty of audiobooks on both CD and in digital platforms like Levy. We visited these branches in June, so we expected to see plenty of Pride Month displays, and most had that, but fewer had diverse and inclusive titles called out in a more permanent collection. Most had a New York Times bestseller list posted near the entrance, but those who didn't really miss out on an easy way to promote their recent trendy acquisitions.
Also of note, we found Genderqueer, a memoir, one of the most banned current books in America at most of the branches we visited. Very surprising. In reality, any patron at any library can actually get nearly any banned book by leveraging the Palace Project, Hoopla, Libby, and other digital resources that have stepped up to fill the gap and libraries have purchased and used. Like everything else, we think this is an issue of access, and we want to remind you that these exist. The Palace Project, for example, is entirely free and does not require a library card or to belong to any city.
So this last area of focus had us looking at the sense of community that these libraries were promoting. To our pleasant surprise, every branch offered programs and events at least once a week, and they all had at least a small version of a local history section. We were disappointed to find, though, that no libraries with a local author section in our initial survey. but have since discovered a couple local branches that do feature this, with only one that does so prominently. And our favorite example of one library that met nearly everything on this list after our initial survey was Bernal Heights branch in San Francisco. We understand that our criteria in the study wasn't unreasonable to ask for a library.
So, as you can see, we feel like we've uncovered a treasure trove, and we think it's responsible to publish this. We're doing our best with this, and we're planning on launching a blog and other types of resources that we think that might be able to allow you to inspire each other to care as much as we do. We currently are focusing on really two different areas as we focus on ways to shift our current research into actions, and that is on integrating into library programs and events, as well as supporting library infrastructure and resources.
And it's great because there are already a couple of really great examples of this that we've been able to find, but they are far and few in between. Last summer's San Francisco Public Library Reading Challenge was partially sponsored by San Francisco-based publisher Chronicle Books. And when we spoke to their marketing team at the ALA conference earlier this year, we learned that they do so much more for their public libraries. And in 2018, Boston Public Library partnered with local publisher Candlewick Press to launch a bibliocycle, because if people can't get to the library, we should be able to bring it to them.
Also of note, we both Rachel and I were able to get a San Francisco reading tote in Bernal Heights last summer. It was a great highlight. The St. Louis Public Library hosted an event in early 2020 that sponsored with a local publisher, Vaudeville Press, who reached out to a local branch when they're about to release this title focused on juggling. It was such a cool story. They worked to make this event on World Juggling Day and ended up bringing 200 attendees to watch this incredible act of circus. The publisher celebrated this idea and have a great quote from them, that there are real dollars attached to library marketing efforts, with in-house and online library displays often proving as impactful as other publisher marketing investments at a fraction of the cost. So 100%, this is definitely the case for small, scrappy organizations. You can already find a way to work with your local libraries. But the pathway also applies to the big ones too. In 2016, the New York Public Library launched its own imprint with the Big Five publisher, Macmillan, and spent a lot of time partnering within all of that work. And among the books they published was a children's picture book that pays homage to the iconic lions who stand outside the library's main building.
Plus, just late last year, our very own Los Angeles Public Library System acquired local indie publisher Angel City Press after forming a partnership back in 2013 to publish work gathered from the library archives. This is the first of its kind and certainly not the blueprint for other indie publishers, but it shows how the missions of both entities are essentially the same, wanting people to read.
We also think that publishers can support the actual resources that make up the library. And to be clear, we do understand that the financing here is complicated, that library foundations likely receive dollars already from publishers. But the shift here is towards celebrating the good efforts, toward marketing what's there, and to allow people to know that you're doing this great work. We think that there is both a way to underwrite the ecosystem with offerings like cozy reading books, learning labs, makerspaces, and the like to safely place that branding alongside those experiences. For example, is there a canceled but successful program that you should be paying attention to that's on your radar? Can we already save a local community's need? And again, how do we scale either downward or upward with what we might know is needed and effective? Because, in the cheapest example, a reading carpet from your local Swedish furniture big box store starts at like $14.95. And if we go to a library and we don't see this rather important part of that ecosystem, we feel like it's an easy thing that someone might be able to invest in. And if you do choose to invest, one of the things we would also strongly recommend is to consider the lesson of the Carnegie Libraries and the investments into these libraries. Create plans to make the offerings you have as open and free to all, and be really careful to push against these things. Rightfully, you control the purse strings, especially if you're looking at large 6+ figure investments, as you might be looking at a capital campaign together. And specifically, we'd recommend prioritizing a specific type of permanent infrastructure, focusing on things that will last for years to come, and resources that will help the community and impact physical resources, as opposed to spending on annual salaries and other sort of frivolous social media campaigns that don't necessarily have a long-lasting effect. They're really rather short in their life.
And we know publishers can apply their resources to close the socioeconomic gaps and build their brands along the way. What we saw in the first round of research was that more dollars earned per capita almost always translates to more libraries per zip code. But higher density does not equal more or bigger libraries. In fact, the poorest zip codes in LA were the densest and had the least amount of branches. For example, the Mary McLeod branch, which serves the most populated and an impoverished zip code in Los Angeles, scored well, and we were pleasantly surprised at how welcoming it was. In comparison, the cities of El Segundo and Torrance, home to their own library systems, 5 branches each, and serving as headquarters to major oil and car companies, have the highest density of libraries per capita. In our home city of Long Beach, which is another oil city, we found the only 2 examples across all the libraries we visited of clear investment in the facilities and infrastructure, featuring logos of the sponsorees on display. Note that neither were in publishing, and we need to change that. The one photographed here for the Family Learning Center is BP, who sponsored a local family learning center at one of our branches. Also, this learning center was closed each time we visited, and we know that the idea of the Carnegie Principle is probably being missed here. So yeah, hey publishers, you too can advocate. And while these recommendations are nearly actionable, the reality is libraries and publishers are entrenched in process and tradition. With good reason, they're powerful hubs of knowledge. The gatekeeping that's been discussed in this forum, as well as the bureaucracy within government, prevents our low-level survey data from actually making an impact. No one paid for our limited resources of time, gas, electricity, and tacos to make this. Yet we know how powerful this survey and focus on libraries could be if funded appropriately. As a reminder, our slides will be available with our evaluation checklist with notes and links to give you even more inspiration along the way. Can you imagine if we went to all 289 libraries in the Los Angeles regional area? What if we evaluated every branch in the country? We know this can grow. There's a lot more to learn, and I think we need to create an inter-industry dialogue that promotes transparency. Perhaps a guild. Get the smart people from the library and publishing domains and put them in the same room. Take what PEN America and the ALA have started and run with it. Think of it this way. In this effort, we've all discovered how libraries and publishers each hold a piece of the puzzle to protect and promote literacy, but it's up to us to all of us to put it together. We urge you to embrace connection, to find those missing pieces and unlock the full potential of our libraries. Will you rise to the challenge and help us turn the page to a brighter chapter for readers everywhere?
So in conclusion, we think there's a lot to the future of the publishing industry. And as all of you play a crucial role in cultivating lifelong readers, and the collaboration between publishers and libraries benefits everyone. Our goal is to secure the funding where libraries, secure the future where libraries thrive as inclusive community hubs, which will likely only be possible with the funding and partnerships that we've discussed today.
And here are some action steps for you when you return to wherever you might be in the world of books, journal, audio, and other multimedia. We think everyone should celebrate the good in reading in libraries and start to tackle some of the challenges we've talked about. That publishers should continue to support, expand their impact, create a guild, and libraries need to be open to these partnerships and come together to promote the shared Books for All concept. Thank you all, and we hope that you'll all go visit your local library branch soon.
All right, excellent. Okay, thank you, Rachel and Leo. That was excellent. So we're going to have some time for questions for all of our panelists in this session. We have one question in the Q&A. Please add additional questions. I'm going to take the prerogative, though, and starting us off with a question, if you don't mind. Digital publishing in particular is something I've been interested in for, I don't know, 25 years or 30 years. And I was thinking of some of the ones that are gone. In particular, one that I remember that was done by some, it was a LA Arts High School, and they had done an interactive digital comic kind of on the conquest of Mexico from a Chicano perspective, and you could kind of interact with it. It was amazing. I don't remember exactly the title, but it's completely gone from the internet. So for particularly for our first panelists, but also for Rachel and Leo, what is an example of a project that you are aware of, that you love, that is gone? And then more importantly, for Sara and Allison and Anna Maria and others, what are some of the steps that you can take as a publisher to make sure that these digital projects won't be gone, 20 years from now or 30 years from now? I think it's easy to preserve it for the next, few years, but 30, like I said, this interactive comic, digital comic was like 25, 30 years ago, and it's completely gone from the internet. So you have a favorite example of one that's gone, and then what can we do to make sure they're around 20 or 30 years from now?
I mean, I'm happy to jump in, but I don't have a favorite lost project. So I think that, Stanford University Press did a lot of work on really innovative digital projects, and one of the people who was in their team there has done a lot of work on how to archive them. And so it's a kind of multi-pronged process. And so that includes using a web recorder to go through and map the experience to try and have like a version of it that you can go fall back on, which is something that previous projects didn't do. So partly using that kind of technology. They also have a commentary from the author that's filmed discussing all the different parts of the project. They have extensive documentation requirements. So that's just one example of how you can do it, but it really is trying to think about what does your project revert to at the point that it breaks, and what are the aspects that break, and are they central to the scholarship, and how to figure that out. So I think that's one aspect. I work directly with authors. I'm not at a press, and we definitely try and think about what is the time horizon for the book and what are the aspects which are critical to make the argument. And that sometimes does mean that their ideas of interactivity need to be scaled back because we're not confident, or we say, let's do like, why don't we have that interactive element be one thing and it's in the project, but it isn't in every chapter. It doesn't kind of, it isn't a necessary part of navigating through the project, because otherwise the idea that if it breaks, you still can access other things. So those are a few thoughts.
I'll just add quickly to that in that episode that that May mentioned, also having really early conversations with authors about what platforms they would want to use too. It has a huge impact on the kinds of things they want to include, can include, how it's preserved, how it's archived. And so it's being very intentional, and it's one of those things where sometimes you don't know what to ask. And so I think what's really wonderful about the episodes that somebody has asked some of those questions for you, but it's a meeting a lot of expertise together, and sometimes just needing to ask certain questions from different kinds of professionals.
I just wanted to say two things. One, that the Fulcrum platform, which is what we use at University of Michigan Press, was built with Mellon money specifically to deal with the problem of digital projects like the one that you're talking about that disappeared, right? So, Fulcrum was built with these design principles so that it would be flexible, durable, discoverable, accessible. And it has long-term preservation in mind. And so that was the first thing I wanted to say. So it's like plug for University of Michigan Press and anybody who's using Fulcrum. It's built to preserve projects in the long run, and everything's backed up on library infrastructure. The other thing, though, that I wanted to mention is I wanted to give a shout out to the Embedding Preservability Initiative. Is that what you were going to say, Allison? So I'll drop the link, but that was another Mellon-funded initiative, and they've come up with a set of 68 recommendations designed to help publishers create digital publications that can be preserved in the long run. And I did some work with them on one of my projects where I was working with a scholar, A.D. Carson, who had published, or his dissertation was a rap album, and it lived on his webpage. And so actually, I think it publishes today on Fulcrum. We published a version of it on Fulcrum so that it would be backed up in the long term, but there were some pieces of it that we weren't sure how to back up on our own. And so I worked with the Embedding Preservability team, it's a hard word to say, to figure out the best way to back up some of the trickier parts of his project. And so one of the things we had to do was, he has a timeline that lives on his webpage. We couldn't host that in Fulcrum. And we ended up creating a WARC file of it and then saving the WARC file on Fulcrum so that people can look at it in the future. So anyway, I know there's lots of other people who want to talk, and I will let them speak now.
I'll just piggyback there to say, yes, we were thinking of the same thing. I also put a link to the Stanford University Press blog. Jasmine Mulliken has been handling preservation there, and she has some really, really great pieces on the blog about their process. And Brown 2 has been collaborating with the preservability team, and we just had a meeting this week with them. So we have one of our current projects that is in development is serving as a case study in the second phase of this grant. It's a Mellon grant supporting this project, and the objective now is to start working with content developers at the very beginning so that preservation methods are not an afterthought. It doesn't come post-publication, but it is from the beginning something that we're thinking about, just as now we are thinking about accessibility from the beginning. So there are a lot of great resources between those two organizations.
Great. Yeah, I think Born Digital and Born Accessible are both good philosophies to follow here. Okay, Rachel and Leo.
So I actually have a really interesting, fun, favorite project that I'll talk about, and it actually mentions a great presentation that I gave back a couple years ago as well. So if anyone's interested in hearing more about this idea, it's one of my favorite topics. In 2010, a good friend of mine, Matthew Gehring, and I both transferred to San Jose State from our local community colleges, and we banded together to create one of the first mobile-focused websites in WordPress. At the time, people weren't building websites for mobile devices. WAP sites, if you're familiar with that, that was the thing back then. Mobile sites were terrible. They didn't really work. So we took the trend and built out one of the first mobile responsive websites in the country. We were a week behind the Boston Globe, who gets the credit as the first one. So the New York Times, I think, took another 4 or 5 years to make all that happen. For a variety of really complicated bureaucratic reasons that are educational systems, I understand professors work really hard to be able to make this happen, but capital campaigns don't really support this kind of thing. The website that we produced eventually fell by the wayside. The school abandoned the entire website, which is kind of crazy to me, but it disappeared. And so the only snapshot of this is on the Internet Archive. And the Internet Archive this week, I don't know if you're reading the news, kind of controversial organization. I think that they do a lot of great work, all things considered. That archive has been under a DDoS attack and might disappear. It's a scary thing to think, but that is the last snapshot. The talk I gave in 2018, I was at WordCamp Riverside, and I'll post it here in the chat in a minute. But we covered off the major shift in WordPress. So WordPress powers 40-some-odd% of the internet, and also heavily under controversy this week. Some really interesting, crazy things that are happening in the news regarding the co-founder who's kind of gone off the rails. In reality, the pitch in 2018 was that the framework was changing and tools were breaking. We saw that content was disappearing as we were creating it. Literally, the JavaScript-based framework that was replacing the old one would just crash. And so this idea of content disappearing is literally happening in front of us, and we have an ethical and moral responsibility to save and capture all of it. The talk kind of gets a little bit sillier. We had this idea of if we could make it the world's most compatible thing. So we made the first website that you could actually consume via VR and also fax, and you could at one point send me a letter in the mail. I would have sent you a copy of the website. So we were kind of being silly and jest, but in reality, the kinds of things we create have to be consumable in every format, and we have to preserve these things over the long term.
Excellent. All right. So let's take a few of the questions from the Q&A, and thanks for putting these in. This is from an anonymous attendee. Thank you for the great conference. You're welcome. For those who have successfully implemented new digital publishing models at their presses, what was the first step? As I think someone mentioned, it can be tricky to convince publishers to invest in initiatives that have a shorter shelf life. Particularly those that require significant financial commitments like digital humanities and aren't already locked into the tenure system. These aspects coupled with complications around tenure qualification make it more difficult to make a convincing argument. These initiatives are, of course, important for so many reasons, not the least among them accessibility and providing an avenue for early career researchers. Do you have any tips? So there have been a few things raised on this, but why don't you elaborate, all of you?
Brown University Digital Publications is not a press, so our focus is on supporting our faculty, largely Brown faculty, but other authors as well, where we can. And so we're on the born digital content development side of things, though we make the full commitment to building out the work, and then we partner with different presses to bring the work out. And our program got started with Mellon funding, as I mentioned, but we are now a sustained program here at the university. And I can say something about tenure and promotion. From the beginning here at Brown, it's been a primary objective to make sure that peer-reviewed, scholarly press published, born digital projects receive the same weight in the tenure and promotion review. And we've been very successful here at Brown, able to do that. Our dean of the faculty, who was an original co-PI on that first Mellon grant, worked with all of the departments. So at the departmental level here at Brown, the guidelines have been revised to make sure that that faculty pursuing these new scholarly forms are getting the proper credit for it. And we have had early career scholars move through the promotion process with a Born Digital monograph in their tenure dossier. Of course, we want to see more such examples, but that work is happening.
That's excellent. I'm not sure who raised their hand first, but Maya and Anna Maria.
Sure, I'll just be quick, because like Brown, we're not a press and we partner with presses, but I can say from our side, so we also benefited from a Mellon grant to start this initiative, and our program has now been adopted by the Office of Faculty. So I think key to that happening was being able to show the to be able to quantify and to point to even just qualitative examples of how the reach of research was extended through open access and digital publishing. And so kind of whether it's being invited to give talks in different parts of the world, or it's download numbers or those kinds of things to make the case that the research of our faculty was more impactful because it was published digitally. I think that was a key thing. The other thing that I would say is that we have a digital scholarship center that is really well established and does amazing work, and we work closely with them, and I think that's a huge benefit. And we use the Mellon grant to sort of experiment a little bit with supporting different types of digital projects, and we've now landed on 2 platforms that we use and use consistently, and there's a limit to how much customization we'll do for our faculty, and we talk about that with them at the beginning of the process. So we kind of have been able to use the grant funding to refine a kind of offer to faculty, and then we can work with presses. And so many of the presses that we've worked with haven't done any what we call enhanced digital editions before, but they know, like, this is what we can handle, this is what our workflow looks like, here's the time at which we'll need the book files from you, here's the time when you'll have an opportunity to review it. And so I think it's been great having that grant support to figure out what we can then offer to presses and then partner with them so they feel much more comfortable and we kind of know a bit more what we're doing. So that's been kind of the route from our side.
Great. Anna Maria?
Yes, I think May said it, all, and the only thing to add is that although publishers definitely are part of the promotion and tenure system, and it is certainly something that we take to heart into consideration, we are also motivated by, if somebody's an independent scholar, or if they just have a knowledge base in this and have a passion for it, we definitely want to collaborate with them and try to see how can this take shape? What is this more of a kind of distilling? Are we distilling from something that you've done to create something that is more like a book or a digital born project, or is this more of a repository, something else that maybe even librarians can inform us about, with library publishing initiatives and organizations, are they best suited to handle the kind of project that is there? But I think it's one of the commitments certainly is to do that. And I wondered if Sarah is comfortable thinking about how to start, and Fulcrum and University of Michigan Press to just maybe say a few words of how that initiative was started there.
Yeah, I mean, that initiative preceded my time at Michigan. So it's like I've heard the stories, but if I try to tell you guys what'll happen, I will miss really key events. And so like the thing that I would add to sort of piggyback on what everybody else is saying is that if you're a publisher, you don't have a grant, you want to start a digital publishing program, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You want to look at what are the platforms that are out there, right? I mean, and I think of Fulcrum, I think of Scalar, I think of PubPub. What am I missing, Allison? Allison's really good on what are the platforms and what's best for what kind of project.
Manifold.
Manifold. Oh my gosh, can't believe I forgot them.
Yeah, don't forget that one. John Maxwell did a great, and others. John Maxwell did a really great report on all these different platforms, which I could try to find and put in the chat. But yeah, that was excellent. And I'll mention, Tanya, you mentioned earlier wanting to work with Fulcrum and Michigan, but also like wanting to do a print book. And you said, for people to remember the print, but I will also say that that is a great way of preserving these. It's not preserving the digital version, obviously, but once you put out that print book, the project doesn't disappear because at least somebody's going to have a copy of it. So I think that's always good if you can do a print version.
And that's really important to me because, although I study and celebrate playwrights, the print version is super important. I'm a professor of literature after all. So, the books matter, but also because this project ties me very closely to the librarian on my campus, it's even more relevant for us that this text is also produced on paper because as much as our library is moving toward digital, there's still something about walking through those stacks, on a college campus in a library that sort of indoctrinates a student and further indoctrinates a professor into the life of the mind. And so print is keen.
All right, let's see. We have time for a couple other questions before our break. So we have a question from Catherine Yam for Rachel and Leo. This is a fascinating study. A couple questions. Could you talk more about why it's important to de-emphasize a banned books narrative and focus more on books for all? And second is, given differences across cities in available public resources, population demographics, existing local networks, etc., how do publishing professionals adapt accordingly to specific library system contexts? So you and Rachel, you and Leo can start with this, but we could also hear from others on this question.
We'll go first.
Yeah. So I'll take this first question. So first of all, banned books, censorship, those are, of course, obviously very important part of the conversation. It's very important to talk about them. Banned book week was just a couple of weeks ago. We know that the banned books numbers are rising every year. But we think that the conversation is a little bit larger than just that. Instead of focusing on the books that people do not have access to, we want to really talk about the larger narrative of, do people have access to books in general? And then within that, obviously, do they have access to the books that they need, the books that they want, and the books that are important to them? But by focusing on books for all and freedom to read, like ALA's program is starting, is to really focus and make sure that the access to literacy, development and resources is available first and foremost for the people, is really the first step that you can take. And then from there, obviously, you can challenge book bans and censorship and all of those very important things.
Yeah, and frankly, it's kind of like whack-a-mole. Every time a book is banned, another title comes out and it's just as awesome. And Maya Kobabe has been such a great sport on this entire chaos. I can't imagine having a piece of your own life being made fun of and mocked when the literal book is itself about, going to a library, finding the joy in discovery. It was one of our slides. We had the picture of all of the great books that reference these other things that are there. We know that the library systems that are around us don't necessarily have those full resources. So yes, you can go there and read a book, but are you going to want to stay? Are you going to want to come back? Will you remember to go there? Will there have something to draw you back in? And looking at the different types of city demographics around public resources, I think the reality in this situation is you kind of just have to choose something. So I really liked how Candlewick, based in Boston, just chose Boston. Chronicle Books, whose sister to the old publication, the San Francisco Chronicle, where I used to work, Chronicle Books had such a great focus in the city. Most of their work was impacting San Francisco. So if you're a publisher, you are based somewhere, or you have people based somewhere. Choose your local resources and start there. In reality, this framework that we've come up with gives you some of those basic questions to ask. So reading carpets, we kind of joke, but it's probably the cheapest and easiest thing to implement. Or maybe Publishers Weekly type lists can be put on various, bestseller lists on the front of every library. These things are small things that you can push for. If you have a trade book that you think is going to be really powerful and impactful, we want you to make sure that people get those books to those kids. We want people to feel good about what's being published. The other big part of the adapting thing here is recognize that libraries themselves are usually governmental organizations. There's usually a sister organization that's a foundation that's receiving money, that's going and sort of processing that money. It is a complicated thing and it is documented elsewhere, but understanding that is really important before you really kind of just say, yes, let's go talk to a library. They're going to send you to the foundation anyway.
Well, thanks all of our panelists in this great session. Thank you so much, Allison and Anna Maria, Sara, I'm trying to catch everybody here, Latanya, Rachel and Leo, and of course Diona, who we heard from via video. Let's thank her as well. So thanks everybody again. Great panel. Really enjoyed this, and we'll be back shortly.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, John and
Thanks so
Pooja.
much.